Shalom, shalom. Good morning, Boker Tov to all of you. So delighted to be on with you this beautiful Monday morning and excited for what God has in store for all of us. Welcome into this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we talk about the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. This is a live call-in show, and the phone lines are open. And we encourage you to give us a call. Our call-in number is 850-660-9595. Give me a call. Let's talk about what's on your heart, mind, or spirit. These 2 hours are just a small part of the 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week programming on our station, where you can listen on iHeartRadio, the Igniting Nation apps, and the ignitingnation.com website, where you can view these 2 hours simulcast on all social media, and you can listen to all of our programs all day long, all night long, any hour of the day or night. And we encourage you to do so. The programs throughout the day are teachings, sermons given over the past 20 years. And if you're interested in the full series or a particular teaching, visit the Biblical Truth Library on our website, where you can acquire the entire teaching. And that teaching becomes yours. That's something you can use for your Bible study, something for your home group, something for your congregation, something to pass to your pastor or teaching pastor that may want to use, that has not done a study on Arabs in the Bible or about Israel or so many of the topics we cover, demons, angels, the list goes on and on. All that is available to you for download, small a la carte fee, or you can subscribe and have unlimited access to everything that your heart could desire when it comes to those things that are related to biblical truth and to teaching from an entire Bible perspective, from the New Testament, Old Testament, connecting the two into the one book that they were intended to be. We would not be able to bring you the rebirth of the highly successful TV program Revealing the Truth that ran for over 2,500 episodes were not for the generosity of our faithful donors and our sponsors, the Don Burt team at Keller Williams Emerald Coast and Navarre Chiropractic Center. In both cases, I have personal experience with both Don Burt and Dr. Laird Likens, and Don Burt and her team helped me through every aspect of home acquisition imaginable over the past 3 years. Don and her team have been serving the needs of both military and civilian clients. Don was a medic in the military. She has great training and a great affinity for the military community. She is very well connected there and has assisted in the relocation of many who come to this area, train at the Special Forces Center, train at Eglin, train at any one of the bases here, and are relocated and need to sell their home and make arrangements on both ends. Her team are great at coordinating and establishing relationships both here and in the city you're going to, or if you're relocating here, opening up doors of opportunity for you here. If you're considering a move in any way, any kind in Northwest Florida, whether it's to purchase a vacation home or a home that you can use and rent out, something for Airbnb, all kinds of opportunity here. Give Dawn and her team a call at 850-684-4284 and check them out online at teamburt.com. And a special thank you to my great friend and personal chiropractor at the Navarre Chiropractic Center, Dr. Laird Likens. He and the entire team took me from 24 hours a day of debilitating neck pain to a pain-free life. There are chiropractors, and then there's this team focused on a holistic approach that incorporates every technique from classical adjustment to acupuncture, heat therapy, traction, massage, and personal trainers to make sure you will get the very best care possible. Don't wait. This full service practice should be your first stop after a car accident or any injury to your body. If you don't have any insurance, no worries. They have a plan to accommodate any situation. Give them a call right now at 850-939-3339 and look them up online at navarrechiropracticcenter.com. These are great friends, and you are a fabulous group of supporters who have been so faithful to continue to support Igniting Nation Ministries since we morphed out of the congregation life. I left the congregation, formed Igniting Nation Ministries, and in 2014 began this 8-year run of teaching and being a bridge to so many who are in the churches who have never heard about the Jewish roots of Christianity, who have never heard all of the passages of Scripture about Israel, who have never heard about Satan's diabolical plan to kill the seed line of Messiah, which is the theme of my new book, 315, The Genesis of All Prophecy, available on Amazon in both paperback and Kindle, as well as on all of the book-selling sites. It is an eye-opener. It will shock you as to what you belong to if you're denominationally affiliated, and what you can do to move the church more to the true ecclesia, to the true united body of Messiah that we so talk about, but so few of us act it out. And that means a reconciliation between Jew and Gentile, and for each of us to do our part in bringing the gospel to Israel, bringing the gospel to the Jew, and fulfilling what Messiah was very clear in explaining, that he was not coming back until Jerusalem called for his return. And there's a certain order to that return, and we're going to talk about some of that today as we're going to dig into the news about war in Israel. First, the good news. At 12:11 p.m., that was just 8 hours ago, the military announced that it was removing all security restrictions put in place during several days of fighting with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad as a ceasefire between Israel and the Gaza-based terror group held. The Egyptian-mediated deal, which went into effect at 11:30 p.m. Sunday, ended a 3-day conflict that began Friday with Israeli strikes that killed a top Palestinian Islamic Jihad commander. Palestinian terrorists fired around 1,100 rockets towards Israel's territory, while the Israel Defense Forces pummeled Islamic Jihad targets and killed another of the Iran-backed organization's top military leaders in Gaza. As a matter of fact, the announcement this morning is that the entire leadership team has been eliminated. And I just got this report in that the Israel's Iron Dome showed a 97% success rate during the rocket-riddled weekend. This anti-missile defense system protects thousands of civilians and saving the lives of innocent women and children who are hiding out in shelters. In a statement Monday morning, the IDF initially announced the gradual rollback of safety precautions, including the reopening of roads near the Gaza border. Roads in the area were shuttered last week after Israel arrested Islamic Jihad West Bank leader, prompting threats of retaliation by the terror group that helped precipitate the weekend's fighting. Now, I know that this can get to be very confusing. There's the PLO, there's Fatah, there's Hamas, there's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, there's the Muslim Brotherhood. There's so many names being bandied around this small country that's only the size of New Jersey. And everyone is attacking, and Israel is in the news on a regular basis, and that's because it is the biblical center of all prophecy. And that biblical center of all prophecy also parallels all of the biblical prophecy regarding the Messiah, his coming, his death, his resurrection, and his second coming and return. And we will talk about how all that correlates and ties in. And I will try to give you an explanation that is clear, concise, and simple to understand so that you know who we're dealing with, because there are factions. There is what's going on in Gaza, which is a separate territory than what's going on in Judea and Samaria, that's under control of two different governments, two different leaders. So there's even dissension within the ranks of those who call themselves Palestinians. The IDF said residents of communities in the so-called Gaza envelope area no longer needed to remain near a bomb shelter, and regular train service between the southern cities of Ashkelon and Sderot was due to resume at noon. Now, if you look at a map of Israel and you want to know what's going on, look at Gaza, look at the Gaza border, and then you're going to start to see a number of names of towns pop up. Ashkelon, Ashdod, uh, Beersheba, Sderot. These are the areas that are within the range of what Hamas was originally attacking, but we also see that during this current barrage of over 1,100 missiles that they were launched toward Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and had the range to reach them, which is an escalation in attacks on two major populations of citizens. These are not military installations. And as we're seeing what's going on in Ukraine, we're saying that Russia's not attacking military installations. They're going after the civilian population. So the mass extermination of Ukrainians, the mass extermination of Jews, is the goal of these organizations. And so we have to be clear that the darkness and the present evil that's in the world today is something that needs to be contended with, something that needs to be addressed as we look at how Satan is expanding and the darkness is creeping at an alarming rate. Later on this morning, the Eshkol Region Council informed residents of the southern Israeli region, which was battered heavily by rockets from Gaza during Operation Breaking Dawn, of a full return to routine. A statement from the council said limits on gatherings and workplaces would be lifted, and that educational activities and agricultural work can resume. It added that public swimming pools can also reopen. The military said in a later statement that all restrictions on the number of participants permitted at gatherings were officially removed. Also, Monday, the military liaison to the Palestinians announced that crossings between Israel and Gaza will reopen for humanitarian purposes after a security assessment. The reopening allowed renewed fuel shipments into Gaza after the closures led the Strip's sole power plant to drastically reduce operations. The Defense Ministry body, widely known by its acronym COGAT or COGAT, said a meeting to consider a full reopening of the crossing will be held if calm is maintained in the south. The Eretz terminal between Israel and Gaza, which serves as the sole pedestrian crossing for Palestinians in the coastal enclave, was struck Sunday by mortars launched from Gaza, according to the Defense Ministry. Damage is caused to the roof of the Eretz crossing near the border with the Gaza Strip. The ministry said the terminal roof was damaged as a result of a fire and shrapnel fell into the entrance hall. No one was injured as the crossing, which is usually used by thousands of Palestinians to enter Israel each day for work, was shuttered last week amid the threat of a Palestinian Islamic Jihad attack on the border and remained closed amid the fighting. According to the IDF, Palestinian terrorists fired over 1,100 rockets towards Israel during the fighting, around 380 of which were intercepted by the Iron Dome missile system with a success rate of 95 to 97%. The military estimated that around 200 projectiles failed to clear the border and landed inside the Gaza Strip. In a briefing to reporters, an IDF spokesman said the military believed 51 people were killed in Gaza during the fighting, 24 of them terrorists from Islamic Jihad. According to the military, 16 people uninvolved in the hostilities were killed by Gazan rockets that fell short. A further 11 people were killed who were not affiliated with terror groups, meaning that a total of 27 Gazan civilians, including a number of children, were killed in the fighting. The Gaza Health Ministry, run by Hamas, said that at least 44 Palestinians have been killed, including 15 children, and 360 people have been wounded since Friday. Several Israelis were lightly injured by shrapnel during the fighting or while running for shelter when the rocket sirens sounded. Millions were forced to shelter from barrages of rockets fired from Gaza, some of which reached as far as Tel Aviv and towns around Jerusalem. So as we look at this report that's coming out of Israel, this is escalation over just a 3-day period. And we need to look at the source of this, but we also need to look at the biblical impact of all of this. And I want to encourage all of you to really hang in there to understand what is going on and why. This report by AP, Israel and Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip were exchanging fire Saturday in the worst bout of cross-border violence since an 11-day war between Israel and Hamas last year. Israeli airstrikes have killed 11 people, including a senior commander from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, an Iran-backed militant group who was slain in a targeted attack. Militants have fired dozens of rockets at Israeli towns, cities, disrupting life for hundreds of thousands of people. Here is a look at the last round of violence. Islamic Jihad is the smaller of the two main Palestinian military groups in the Gaza Strip and is vastly outnumbered by the ruling Hamas group. But it enjoys direct financial and military backing from Iran and has become the driving force in engaging in rocket attacks and other confrontations with Israel. Hamas, which seized control of Gaza in 2007 from the internationally recognized Palestinian Authority, or what was formerly known as the PLO, is often limited in its ability to act because it bears responsibility for running day-to-day affairs of the impoverished territory. Islamic Jihad has no such duties and has emerged as the more militant faction, occasionally even undermining Hamas's authority. The group was founded in 1981 with the aim of establishing an Islamic Palestinian state in the West Bank, Gaza, and all of what is now Israel. It is designated a terrorist organization by the United States State Department, European Union, and other governments. Like Hamas, Islamic Jihad is sworn to Israel's destruction. Israel's archenemy, Iran, supplies Islamic Jihad with training, expertise, and money, but most of the group's weapons are locally produced. In recent years, it's developed an arsenal equal to that of Hamas, with longer-range rockets capable of striking central Israel's Tel Aviv metropolitan area. Air raid sirens went off in the suburbs just south of Tel Aviv on Friday, although no rockets appear to have hit the area. Although its base is in Gaza, Islamic Jihad also has leadership in Beirut and Damascus, where it maintains close ties with Iranian officials. Ziad al-Naqala, the group's top leader, was in Tehran meeting Iranian officials when Israel began its operation in Gaza on Friday. This isn't the first time Israel has killed Islamic Jihad leaders in Gaza. The commander it killed Friday, Taseer al-Jabari, replaced Baha Abu el-Attah, who was slain by Israel in a 2019 strike. His death has been the first high-profile assassination of an Islamic Jihad figure by Israel since the 2014 war in the Gaza Strip. al-Jabari, 50, age 50, was a member of Islamic Jihad's military council, the group's decision-making body in Gaza. He was in charge of the Islamic Jihad military activities in Gaza City and the northern Gaza Strip during the 2021 war. Israel said he was preparing to launch an anti-tank missile attack against Israel. His death came on the heels of the arrest by Israel of a senior Islamic Jihad commander in the West Bank earlier this week. Bassam al-Saadi, age 62, is a senior Islamic Jihad official in the northern West Bank. According to Israeli media, al-Saadi was working to deepen the group's reach in the West Bank and expand its capabilities. Al-Saadi spent a total of 15 years over several stints in Israel jails for being an active Islamic Jihad member. Israel killed two of his sons, who were also Islamic Jihad militants, in separate incidents in 2002, and destroyed his home during a fierce battle in the western bank city of Jenin the same year. Once you hit the commanders, it will affect immediately all the organization, said Zivka Haimovich, the former head of the Israeli military's air defense force. It immediately creates a big mess in the jihad. Since seizing power in 2007, Hamas has fought 4 wars with Israel, often with support from Islamic Jihad fighters. Aside from a flare-up earlier this year, the border has largely been quiet since last year's 11-day war, and Hamas appears to be staying on the sidelines of this current conflagration, which might keep it from spilling over into an all-out war. Islamic Jihad militants have challenged Hamas by firing rockets, often without claiming responsibility, to raise its profile among Palestinians, while Hamas maintains the ceasefire. Israel holds Hamas responsible for all rocket fire coming from Gaza. Hamas must walk a tightrope between restraining Islamic Jihad's fire at Israel while avoiding the ire of Palestinians if it cracks down on the group. Like in past flare-ups, Hamas will have the final say in how long and how violent this round of fighting will last. The current fighting comes as Israel is mired in a protracted political crisis that is sending voters to the polls for the 5th time in less than 4 years in the fall. Caretaker leader Yair Lapid took over earlier this summer after the ideological diverse government he helped form collapsed, triggering the new elections. Lapid, a centrist former TV host and author, lacks the security background many Israelis see as essential for their leadership. His political fortunes could rest on the current fighting, either gaining a boost if he can portray himself as a capable leader, or take a hit from a lengthy operation as Israelis try to enjoy the last weeks of summer. Lapid hopes to edge out former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a security hawk who is on trial for corruption charges in the upcoming vote. I think that's a lot for you to digest right now, and I think it's a lot for all of us to process. And so I'm going to take us into a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue in this discussion about war in Israel, the peace that is taking place right now, the ceasefire, and what this is leading up to as far as the prophetic landscape of Israel. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom and welcome back to Revealing the Truth, the update on the Israel war. Critical look at what is to come because war is an eventuality in Israel. If you read your Bible, you know that Israel is the center of all prophecy. Messiah is at the core of it. Israel is the location, and the Jewish people are the important players in this picture. And so we have to take a look at the entirety of the circumstance, the situation, the flare up that fortunately Egypt was again able to step in and broker a peace agreement between the two groups, a ceasefire, based on some discussions about releasing some prisoners, but those discussions have not been confirmed. If you recall that the Oslo Accord that was brokered by Egypt was ultimately the reason why Anwar Sadat was assassinated. So Egypt plays an interesting role. They are not part of the Ezekiel 38-39 uh, coalition. They have their own place. We believe it's in the Psalm 83 war, and we're going to talk about that because there are many implications as to whether or not that happened during the Six-Day War, or it is the war which is coming, which is going to involve Confederates which are not mentioned in the Ezekiel 38-39 alliance. We're taking your calls at 850-660-9595. Love to hear your thoughts about what you've heard about what's going on in Israel, your questions about Israel. We've got people listening in Israel, and we hope that they will call in as well. We've reached out to several of our friends that are getting lots of demands for calling in to give their personal updates, and we're hoping to have one of those in the next hour, hour and a half. But once again, the demand is so high that each one of the prophetic experts are getting the same call from everyone. And hopefully, our friendships are good enough that they know that if they don't call, it has nothing to do with our friendship and it's not conditional upon that. And we will set up a time in the future for them to come on, as I will be extending invitations to other authors and to other contributors to come on the program with us to talk so that you're not just listening to my point of view or my perspective on these particular areas. You have plenty of that in the hours that we are not live, and you're listening throughout the day on our iHeart channel, on the Igniting a Nation apps, on both Google and Apple, on the Igniting a Nation website, and on the Live 365 feed as well. And so, many, many ways to stay in touch with us, many ways to listen to the program and catch up on all the great information that we have for you. As we look at these new elections that are coming into play, it's important for us to understand Israel, who they are, and who the Palestinians are. Are they really, truly, is there really, truly such a thing as a Palestinian? Let's take a look at just a little bit of history. Israel is the world's only Jewish state, located just east of the Mediterranean Sea. Palestinians, the Arab population that hails the land Israel now controls, refers to the territory as Palestine and wants to reestablish or establish a state by that name on all or part of the same land. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is over who gets what land and how it's controlled. Though both Jews and Arab Muslims date their claims to the land back a couple thousand years, the current political conflict began in the early 20th century. Jews fleeing persecution in Europe wanted to establish a national homeland in what was then an Arab and Muslim majority territory in the Ottoman and later British empires, Ottomans being the Turks. The Arabs resisted, saying the land is rightfully theirs. An early United Nations plan to give each group part of the land failed, and Israel and the surrounding Arab nations fought several wars over the territory. Today's lines largely reflect the outcome of two of these wars, one waged in 1948 and another in 1967. The 1967 war is particularly important for today's conflict, as it left Israel in control of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, two territories home to large Palestinian populations. Note that since 1967, Israel has returned Sinai to Egypt. Today, the West Bank is nominally controlled by the Palestinian Authority and is under Israeli occupation. I use that word occupation lightly because Israel has sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. So they're not really occupying. When we think of an occupying force, people from outside the area taking over, Israel earned this right in the wars. They took the territories back. Judea and Samaria were always a part of God's plan for Israel. And we're going to take a look at one of those essential prophecies so we understand this goal to divide Israel is not supported in Scripture. So today, the West Bank is nominally controlled by the Palestinian Authority, is under Israeli occupation. This comes in the form of Israeli troops who enforce Israeli security restrictions on Palestinian movement and activity, and Israeli settlers, Jews who build ever-expanding communities in the West Bank that effectively deny the land to the Palestinians. Gaza is controlled by Hamas, an Islamic fundamentalist party, and is under Israeli blockade, but not ground troop occupation. As we look at what's going on in the West Bank or in Judea, Samaria, that's under the control of Fatah, which is the new PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, founded by Yasser Arafat and now headed by Muhammad Abbas, a very aging leader who is losing a lot of control and was virtually ousted from the unity that the PLO had in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza being unified as a part of the PLO. Gaza voted on their own in their own elections to put Hamas in power. Hamas in Hebrew means violence. So as you read your scriptures and you see the word Hamas in the Hebrew transliteration, you might see it spelled Chamas. In the English, you may see it as Hamas. It has the same meaning whether or not you put a C in front of it or not, and it translates violence. The primary approach to solving the conflict today is the so-called two-state solution that would establish Palestine as an independent state in Gaza and most of the West Bank, leaving the rest of the land to Israel. Though the two-state plan is clear in theory, the two sides are still deeply divided over how to make it work in practice. The alternate or alternative to a two-state solution is a one-state solution wherein all the land becomes either one big Israel or one big Palestine. Most observers think this would cause more problems than it would solve, but this outcome is becoming more likely over time for political and demographic reasons. It's important for us to understand what God has to say about this. And he says it very clearly in Ezekiel 37, verses 20 through 22. Ezekiel 37:20 says, "Hold before their eyes the sticks you have written on, and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel. There will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms." Now, Is he just talking about Israel and Judah? He does not say that. This was fulfilled on May 14th, 1948, and still exists today. Now, the Jews are returning to the Holy Land, and it began largely as a result of persecution. And as we look at the Jewish population today of about 15.2 million Jews throughout the world, approximately half, 50% of them live in Israel now. So we are moving more towards what God prophesied in Ezekiel 34:27-30, where he says, "They shall be safe in their land, and they shall know that I am the Lord, when I have broken down the bands of their yoke and delivered them from the hands of those who enslave them. And they shall no longer be a prey for the nations, nor shall beasts of the land devour them, but they shall dwell safely, and no one shall make them afraid. I will raise up from them a garden of renown, and they shall no longer be consumed with hunger in the land, nor bear the shame of the Gentiles any more. Thus they shall know that I, the Lord their God, am with them, and they, the house of Israel, are my people, says the Lord God." God also said that when Israel returns, the land that became desolate after the exile would be blessed again. I have seen with my own eyes the desert is blooming. Over 800 people have traveled with me over 15 trips to Israel to see that the desert is blooming. In Ezekiel 36:8-11, God writes, "But you, O mountain of Israel, you shall shoot forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people Israel, for they are about to come. For indeed I am for you, and I will turn to you, and you shall be tilled and sown. I will multiply men upon you, all the house of Israel, all of it, and the city shall be inhabited, and the ruins rebuilt. I will multiply upon you man and beast, and they shall increase and bear young. I will make you inhabited as in former times, and do better for you than at your beginnings. Then you shall know that I am the Lord." Ironically, it was the improvement in the land after the Jews began the return from exile in the 19th century that drew in the Arab people from around the surrounding areas. There's evidence that many of these Arabs are descendants of the ancient Edomites, known later in history as the Idumeans. These are the descendants of Esau, and there are many prophecies against Esau and the Edomites. And remember, God did not wipe out Esau and the Edomites. So they are still in the world today and are still plotting the anti-blessing, the anti-Jewishness, the still operating under the belief that the blessing and the covenant ownership of the blessings of God in regards to Israel were stolen from him in a deceptive way when he sold his birthright to his brother in exchange for a pot of stew. So, who do you hold accountable for that decision? Was it the fact that Jacob took advantage of his twin brother? God prophesied that when they were in the womb, that there was going to be this battle that was going on in the womb, and that the older would serve the younger, and this is exactly what took place. And it was a divided household with the father preferring the one son and the mother preferring the other son. So there was division. This division has carried out through history, and that division is present today in the people groups that are involved in the conflicts. So if we take a look at the history, many would take a look at Yasser Arafat and the formation of the PLO as a group of individuals who were offered citizenship in Israel. Some 700,000 Arabs were offered in 1948 citizenship in Israel and refused to accept it. And this was the formation of a group that wanted to be independent and not come under a unified Israeli government. Uh, the history of those 700,000 traces back to many who were expelled from nations such as Jordan, such as Syria. And when we take a look at the fact that they tried to return and were not allowed to return because they were criminals, they were terrorists, they were opposed, and they were part of trying to overthrow uh, the king of Jordan. This was part of their agenda, and the borders became secure, and Jordan said, no, you may not return. So the only thing they could do is try to claim territory for themselves. And it's important to understand that during Israel's War of Independence, 1948, over 700,000 Arabs who resided in Israel fled after the over. The surrounding Arab countries refused to absorb these refugees into their countries. Instead, the countries of Jordan and Egypt annexed the Gaza Strip and West Bank through negotiations and forced the Palestinian refugees to live there. These refugees in Israel are known as Palestinians. The passage that I'm going to read you from Obadiah accurately describes how the surrounding countries have forced Palestinian people to live as refugees. These countries have, in effect, been using the Palestinians as pawns to try and divide and destroy Israel, refusing to absorb them into their own countries after Israel won their War of Independence in 1948. The wording about deception and laying a trap supports the notion that the tents of Edom are pawns or bait in a trap being set for Israel. When we read Obadiah 1 6 to 7, it says, oh, how Esau shall be searched out, how his hidden treasures shall be sought after. All the men in your confederacy shall force you to the border. The men at peace with you shall deceive you, prevail against you. Those who eat your bread shall lay a trap for you. No one is aware of it. Most of the Arab people who live in and around Israel are Muslim. The Jewish state's existence is a direct threat to their religion and belief in the Quran, which is why they deny Israel's sovereignty. Muslims believe that the Jews lost their right to the land because of their disobedience. The Quran teaches that Muslims have to recover land that non-Muslims took from them. This is in Surah 1341. Therefore, they believe Israel has no right to the Holy Land anymore, that it is Allah's will to take it back. Some of the more extremist groups believe in the Hadith, a supplemental holy book to the Quran. The Hadith teaches Muslims to kill Jews and Christians because they're infidels. That's from Hadith 929. Instead of disbelieving in Islam, they reject Israel being a nation and seek annihilation of the Jews. In so doing, they blaspheme the truth of God's word. So it's important to understand uh, who the parties are and what the agendas are and why they are in conflict. And when you have this kind of theological, emotional, nationalistic conflict that we've seen here in the United States, it's led to civil war. And some Americans think that we are on the verge of civil war because of the way the culture is being so completely divided. Well, this is what happens when ideologies, I'm not talking about religion now, ideologies, ideologies of having a democracy in the Middle East and a coalition government which has representation in its Knesset of all kinds of parties, all kinds of factions, from labor to Arab parties to those representing people of different backgrounds and beliefs. The parties are formed as a coalition with representation so that all of those who reside in Israel will be represented uh, equally throughout uh, the area. We've got a caller. Hello, caller. Can you hear me? Yes. Hello. Hello. Well, that's interesting. I'm going to see why that's not happening here. We've got everything connected and it seems to be showing it, but we'll have to run another diagnostic. Okay. Okay. Interesting. I'll have to check and see why. And uh, well, let me take a look at exactly the history of Gaza. Gaza spans about 4,000 years, and yeah, if you want to hang up, you'll be able to hear it much easier by listening to the show. Uh, Okay, there we go. Uh, so the history of Gaza, uh, Gaza was ruled, destroyed, and reoccupied by various dynasties and people. Originally, it was a Canaanite settlement, and it came under the control of the ancient Egyptians for roughly 350 years before becoming one of the Philistines' principal cities. Gaza became part of the Assyrian Empire around 730 BCE. Alexander the Great besieged and captured the city in 323. Most of the inhabitants were killed during the assault, and the city, which became a center for Hellenistic Greek learning and philosophy, was resettled by nearby Bedouins. The area changed hands regularly between two Greek successor kingdoms, the Seleucids of Syria and the Ptolemies of Egypt, until it was besieged and taken by the Hashmoneans in 96 BC. So you have it really from a modern historical perspective. You have Rome involved, the Greeks, Romans, the Jews, the Egyptians, the Persians, the Nabateans, uh, the conversion to Christianity under Saint Porphyrius, who destroyed the 8 pagan temples. Gaza was conquered by the Muslim general Amir ibn al-As in 1100, but was driven out by Saladin. So it was in Mamluk hands. Remember, those were the kids. By the late 13th century, it became the capital of the provinces that stretched from the Sinai Peninsula to Caesarea, which is north of Tel Aviv. It witnessed a golden age under the Ottoman Empire uh, in the 16th century. And so it's got a long checkered history from the Bronze Age all the way to the Roman empires, the Arab caliphates, the Crusaders, the Ottoman Empire under British rule, then Israeli control. And in September 1993, the PLO signed the Oslo Accords, and Gaza and the West Bank town of Jericho were then given the ability to be run by the Palestinian National Authority, led by Yasser Arafat, who ultimately turned it into the Palestinian Liberation Authority. So lots of history there in what's going on in Gaza and in playing an important part of where there's a lot of gathering. Now, there's a lot of humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza because you find that although there's a very high degree of education, a high degree of literacy, education is important in Gaza if you read the reports coming out of Gaza. I'm not sure of the verification of those reports, but I do know that that there is need for humanitarian aid and that these groups which are backed by Iran, who are proxies for Iran, are using those funds not to take care of the citizens of Gaza, but to build military installations, manufacturing facilities, and providing employment for the building of bombs, missiles, rockets in order to attack Israel. So, uh, one of the things that we have to be very careful of is where we get our Israeli news. And Al Jazeera is not where you're going to get truthful Israeli news. The New York Times is not where you're going to get truthful Israel news. There's a site, honestreporting.com, that I highly recommend that you subscribe to their updates, and they verify and are a quality source, although they are not as up to the minute, up to the second as the AP or Reuters or the Jerusalem Post or Haaretz or some of the other Israeli news sources. But you kind of have to take the input from all of them the same way you have to do here in America. It's really no different. Israel uh, has free press. You're able to publish dissenting opinions. You have very conservative, ultra orthodox, and religious opinions. And you have very politically inclined opinions. And so, uh, years ago, when Benjamin Netanyahu was in a meeting, I believe, with one of the presidents, it might have been I don't remember which president it was, and the President of the United States and Prime Minister Netanyahu were having a discussion about how difficult it was, how challenging it was for the President of the United States to be president over 350 million people. And Benjamin Netanyahu looked at him and said, "Sir, I completely understand that, but imagine how difficult it is being the president over 8 million presidents." And so if you are in a Jewish country, if you're in a Jewish city, if you're in a Jewish neighborhood, you're going to find out that we have opinions and we're pretty vocal about those opinions. And so you're going to find that there are a lot of vocal opinions, and you have to weigh those opinions with the facts. I like to take the reports straight from the IDF, who, although it may be propaganda slanted to show favor on the IDF, it also, the IDF is very good about reporting when there are errors made, also their success rate, also their protection of civilians, also the rendering of aid of enemy combatants who have been injured, and there is an Israeli soldier there rendering aid to them. They also talk about how they warn populations that there's going to be an attack in that area so that people can make the appropriate accommodations. I don't know of any other country that does that. We are at a point where we need to take a break, and we are going to go to that break right now. And if it's not coming through the phone lines, if it's not coming through social media, we are still working on connecting all of that. and worked on through the weekend to try to connect all that for you. But apparently, we don't have everything connected exactly right, and we're trying to put 5 disparate systems in through one soundboard to go out to all these different locations. And it has been challenging since it's a one man operation with Jason being my technical advisor, who self admittedly is challenged by some of the things that we find with uh, Apple. So let us go to this next break and we'll return on the other side for the second hour of Revealing the Truth update on Israel. Shalom and welcome back into this second hour of Revealing the Truth, the update on the war in Israel, and kind of giving you a background about the prophecies and taking a look at what's to come. Tomorrow will be our Revealing Life segment, and we're going to talk about things like um, despair and when you're in the wilderness and when you hit a dry spell and spiritual dryness and things that affect the person in life, things that affect me, things that affect you, and those are things that we want to talk about. So That is going to be tomorrow. And of course, Wednesday will be our Revealing Prophecy Day. And Thursday is our continuation in the study of the book of Revelation. I don't want to forget to mention the fact that you, our donors, are what keeps us on the air and brings this program to life and reaching all across the world. Just to give you an example of what's happening, I got an email this weekend that said that 14 new people have come to the Lord from watching these teachings, the sermons at our operation in Kisii, Kenya, and they are launching a project to acquire 2 acres of land to put a banana plantation, and it's going to be worked by the congregation. The proceeds will go to the congregation and be distributed among the people for humanitarian aid, and they will also have an outreach to the community to be able to feed the hungry, to feed the homeless, to take care of the widows and the orphans, and become a self sufficient congregation. This is something that I love to hear, where there's a way to put people who don't have opportunities for employment, don't have skills, and don't have great supplies of food resources. And because bananas are a self generating crop and can be sold, can be made into meals, can be a great source of nutrition. This is the vision of Pastor Job Ezekiel and the next step in the growth, and that's going to require somewhere between $6,000 and $10,000 to acquire 2 acres of land and the banana plants that are going to be required to fill that land. So if you are hearing this message and you would like to contribute to that, just go to the Igniting a Nation donate page at ignitinganation.com and put in your comments or send your check in to the address listed on our website. And in the memo section, put for Kenya. And 100% of the funds which are raised for Israel go to Israel. 100% of the funds that are raised for Kenya go to Kenya. We don't take any administrative fees. We don't keep any part of it. We pass that directly on to ministries that we support. And we tithe to Israel. So it's important that you know that you are dealing with an organization. You can check us out on the websites that rate ministries, and we come up with a crystal clear rating. Our reports are public information. Our 990 filings are current. I just signed our 990 filing for last year just the other day, well, when it was due, so it's been filed. And you can see that we are not a large operation, but we have kind of the Teddy Roosevelt, we carry a big stick, and we're able to reach a lot of people with an extremely small budget. I think if you look at that 990, you would be in shock at how small a ministry we are, but yet how present we are in these operations that we support. So we welcome you to the program. We thank you for your continued contributions. If there's a chance for you to increase, we are having to spend more in order to hire a firm to help promote the program, let people know both in the local Northwest Florida market, but also nationally, because we're heard all over the nation, to attract national sponsors and to attract local advertisers. We need a Google ad campaign, and there is Google for nonprofits, but we need a company, and we're working with one in Florida who is going to help us reestablish that relationship that we had when we had the television program. So any increase that you can give would be extremely helpful, because we are depleting the reserves that we have. We are not growing financially as fast as the expenditures are going out, and that is not a sustainable model. So you play a big part, and of course, our sponsors, the Navarre Chiropractic Center at navarrechiropracticcenter.com, and Team Burt Don Burt and the team there, Keller Williams, both of them have made the decision to stand with us and to help us get this word out into the air because they are not hearing this information anywhere else. They're not hearing it in their churches. They're not hearing it in their small groups. They're not talking about it at the dinner table because they just have no foundation in which to discuss these matters. But because of the program, they're now being equipped to venture into areas, and their acquisition of the book 315, the Genesis of all prophecy, they're putting it in the hands of their pastors, their teachers, and they themselves are reading it and learning about who they are and what they're called to. We all want to know our purpose. Everybody says, what was I made for? What was I created for? And God makes it very, very clear what the Jews and the Gentiles were made for. And the good news is found right there in Genesis 6. And you say, well, wait, the gospel is in Genesis 6? Yes, it is. In the 10 names that are listed in Genesis 6 from uh, Adam to Noah, those names translated from Hebrew to English send an incredibly special message, and it is the gospel message. And it says, the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death will bring those in despair rest or hope. That's the gospel message, that the blessed God will come down, teaching that his death will bring those who are in despair. And look, all of us were in despair when we did not know the Lord. And although we may be despairing and in times of difficulty and tribulation, our hope is in the Lord. And therefore, that is the good news. That is the gospel message. And it's found in the 6th chapter of Genesis. So for those who say that Jesus isn't in the Old Testament, for those who say the gospel is not in the Old Testament, you need to read this book to find out that it is there and who's called to deliver it and how we together are supposed to join together to fulfill this calling that God has on our lives. Our telephone lines are open at 850-660-9595. Certainly, we'll be able to air your question. You may not be able to hear my answer on the phone, but I want to encourage you to call, and I will certainly respond and answer your question completely. But I want to continue in this discussion as to looking at the road ahead. Israel is on the verge of a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, and it's likely that this strike will either initiate a war or start a chain reaction of events that will quickly lead to a war. The war I'm talking about is the war in Psalm 83. Now, there are debates going on that say, well, the groups that were involved in the Six-Day War uh, represent the people groups that are named in the Psalm 83 war. And I think that that is partially true, but I don't believe that it fulfills some of the promises that God makes in the Psalm 83 war. And the outcome of the Psalm 83 war is that Israel will expand its tent pegs, meaning what we know today as Jordan will no longer be known as Jordan, it will be Israel. What we know as Syria will no longer be Syria, it will be known as Israel. What we know as Lebanon, what we know as uh, Lebanon today will be known as Israel, because when Israel expands its tent pegs, and it must expand its tent pegs in order for what is planned during the Gog of Magog, and how the Jews, the leadership will be saved, and what the progression of events will take place. And so, after studying extensively and interviewing Bill Salas and studying his teaching and having permission to share with you and encourage you that if you're not watching Bill Salas, if you're not reading along with him and studying with him, you're missing out on something that may be debatable. There are two camps, but there are two camps on the tribulation. There's camps on pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. Unity and agreement and consensus is not what I think that I think God would like to see that, but it's not the way mankind is. So I'm introducing this to you if you've not heard about it, if you've not paid attention to it, introducing it to this in the equation to show you how these events lead into a war. And as we look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, there are preconditions that exist that cannot exist unless there is a war before the war. And I believe that it's going to be the Psalm 83 war. Bill Salas believes it. Many believe it. There are many who don't believe it, and that's fine. Uh, this program is about revealing the truth, and that truth may be a different truth for you. That's okay. Uh, I'm looking towards the Bible, and I can back up my position biblically. I'm sure that you can back up your position biblically. It's not through the application of a passage of Scripture, but looking at an entire chapter, looking at the evidence of the prophecies. I stand with this. And so as we look at what the Bible tells us, that the Bible tells us that the nation of Israel accomplishes all the prerequisites for the war Gog and Magog via a military solution. In victory, they will become prime for the future events of the Russian-Iranian coalition destined to form against them. At the conclusion of this war, the war preceding the War of Gog and Magog, known as the Psalm 83 War, Israel's conquest over the inner circle of the surrounding Arab populations of Palestinians, Syrians, Saudi Arabians, Egyptians, Lebanese, and Jordanians will see Israel's borders enlarged, prosperity increased, and national stature remarkably enhanced. If we read Ezekiel 28:24 to 26, it says, "No longer will the people of Israel have malicious neighbors who are painful briars and sharp thorns. Then they will know that I am the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. When I gather the people of Israel from the nations where they've been scattered, I will show myself holy among them in the sight of the nations. Then they will live in their own land, which I gave to my servant Jacob. They will live there in safety and will build houses and plant vineyards. They will live in safety when I inflict punishment on all their neighbors who maligned them. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God." Simply paraphrased, yes, they will dwell securely when I, God, execute judgments on all those Arab nations around them who despise them. The Bible tells us that the national security Israel so desperately seeks today occurs via the judgments executed on all of those around them who despise them. Surprisingly, all those Arab nations around them who despise the emerging Jewish state of Israel are conspicuously absent from the Russian-Iranian-led coalition, which includes Ethiopia, Libya, Turkey, along with several modern nations. Prophecy buffs have long wondered why this would be the case, since presently all those Arab nations around them who despise Israel are some of the most vehement enemies of Israel. Coincidentally, the Arab nations in question are members of a distinctly separate and yet to be fulfilled prophecy in the form of a petition to God found in Psalm 83. Now, this is authored in the Psalms by the psalmist Asaph. And Asaph was a seer, S-E-E-R, in Hebrew, chazer. He had visions. So he wasn't considered a prophet per se, but he did have a vision. And he shares this vision from Psalm 83, 1 through 8. And he says, "Do not keep silent, O God. Do not hold your peace, and do not be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, 'Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more.' For they have consulted together with one consent. They form a confederacy against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre, Assyria also have joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot. Selah. We know that the Russian Iranian led coalition will attempt to invade a militarily secure Israel. This condition of security becomes a reality only after the judgments are executed upon the surrounding Psalm 83 nations. The adversaries of Israel who seek to cut off the Jews from being a nation will form their own coalition. Unfortunately for them, they are described in Ezekiel 28:24 to 26 as all those around them who despise them. They are those upon whom God will execute devastating judgments prior to the formation of the Russian-Iranian coalition via the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, many have confused the events of the War of Gog and Magog with a preceding war described in the Psalms, Ezekiel, Obadiah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Zephaniah. Keep in mind that it is God and God alone who destroys the Russian-Iranian coalition. However, in this war, the Psalm 83 war, it's the Israeli army who is blessed by God destroys a different Arab coalition. We read in Ezekiel 25:13 and 14, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will stretch out my hand against Edom and kill its men and their animals. I will lay it waste, and from Teman to Dedan, which is Saudi Arabia, they will fall by the sword. I will take vengeance on Edom by the hand of my people Israel. That's the IDF. And they will deal with Edom in accordance with my anger and my wrath. They will know my vengeance, declares the sovereign Lord. Now, in order to understand this, we have to look at the prerequisites for the war of Gog and Magog. And there are four very specific prerequisites. Excuse me. If you've heard me speak about these before, I will continue to speak about these because these are important. These are prerequisites given by God. One, Israel must be reestablished as a sovereign Jewish nation. Sovereignty means that they will have one government, one land. It will not be divided into two. It says they will live securely without walls, meaning they will be militarily secure. But Israel currently is not sovereign. There's division in the West Bank with Judea and Samaria. There's division in Gaza. There's division in Ramallah, in Jericho, in Nazareth, in Bethlehem. These are all enclaves of large Palestinian communities under the hands of Fatah, under the hands of Hamas, under the hands of Hezbollah, under the hands of the Islamic Jihad, under the hands of being a proxy for Iran. So this can't occur. This Gog Magog can't occur when there are walls, and Israel is surrounded by walls. In order for you to go from the sovereign part of Israel into what's considered to be the West Bank, you go through Checkpoint Charlie. You have to go through a wall, and you see walls lining and dividing the area. From space, it looks like a green belt. There's two sides to this. The green side is where the Israelis live and have built beautiful gardens and moshavs and kibbutzes where they're growing enough vegetables to support the need of the Jewish people living in Israel, and enough that vegetables, produce, are an export into Europe and parts of Africa from Israel. So they are secure. But on the other side, the territory which has been given to the Palestinians under the Oslo Accord have not been maintained. And even though the same greenhouses and the same quality of dirt was there when they took over, that has not been their calling. They don't love the land. they hate the Jews. That's their motivation. Where the Jews love the land and don't have hatred or enmity with anyone. They want to live in peace securely. So right now, you can't live securely. We look at this past weekend where just at 12:11 today, 12:11, I guess it's a.m. today, a ceasefire. So that's not security. Now, they have to be living at peace in the Middle East, meaning that they're at peace with their neighbors. Well, we know they're not at peace with their neighbors. There is Syria, there is Lebanon, there is Jordan, that the Jordanian authority over the Temple Mount is something that creates a tremendous amount of conflict. So, how could it be that Israel is living at peace with their neighbors if their neighbors are who their neighbors are today? That means that Israel is going to have to get into a war where they conquer those neighbors. And now we look at them being at peace with their neighboring countries of Iraq, their neighboring countries of um Saudi Arabia, the neighboring countries of which they are now have incorporated into the tent of Israel. They are expanding their tent. This is why I believe that Petra will be a part of Israel at the time of the Gog Magog war and at the return of the Messiah. And fourthly, Israel has to be one of the richest nations of the world because the nations surrounding them are going to come to try to plunder them because they have so much gold and silver. Now, in years gone by, we looked at the geology and we said, well, there's no gold and there's no silver. But we've now found that maybe those definitions were a little bit too limiting. And because of the great deposits of natural gas, which are being piped through silver pipes, and the black gold, which has been discovered under the Golan Heights, and one of the largest depositories of oil, we now look at that black gold and those silver pipelines as maybe being the fulfillment of that richness that so many people want to plunder. Ezekiel 38:10 through 12 tells us that at the time of the advancing Russian Iranian led coalition, Israel will be a people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls. Israel will be a nation at peace in the Middle East. And so we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the coalition mentioned in the Psalm 83 coalition and compare that with those who are mentioned in the Ezekiel 38-39 coalition. And you're going to see that they are two distinct groups that do not have anything in common, and that is quite a stunning revelation. But we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back into this last half hour of our 2 hour program. We run Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. live. We are live simulcasting to all social media, as well as you can hear us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on iHeartRadio on the Igniting a Nation channel. You can hear us on Live 365 on their feed if you have their app. And if you have the Igniting a Nation apps, both in Google and Android, as well as for Apple. So all the teachings that you're hearing throughout the day are teachings that are available in full through the Biblical Truth Library at ignitinganation.com. Now, I plead guilty to having a reputation of covering a lot of information in a short period of time. And one, it's out of respect for you as students of the Bible to digest this and then go look it up for yourselves. Second, to be a reliable source of information that you may not be getting elsewhere, but to share with you sources that I have. I'm not going to be around forever, but the sources that I draw from should be made available to all of you. So I'm very happy to share and name those sources with you. We don't receive any compensation for mentioning them to you, and hopefully they mention you to us, and we don't give them any compensation for that. There is a family of faith that is formed during the 5 years that we broadcast the television version of Revealing the Truth. We interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not well over 1,000 authors, and made great friends with many of them. And if you read the opening inscriptions in the book uh, 315, the Genesis of all prophecy, you're going to see names like Randy Kay, who's making the circuit on every Christian television program, who is the author of Dying to Meet Jesus, talking about his near death experience. Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat, who has a brand new book out. The name of that book, I'm going to get that for you right now as Rabbi Zev Porat. I don't have the name of his book on my lips, but want to make sure that you know uh, that he is reliable and a very, very good friend. And it's Unmasking the Chaldean Spirit, a Messianic rabbi's stunning and supernatural conversion to faith in Messiah many years ago. The experience upended his entire life in a string of unbelievable ways, and that was just recently released. You can get it on Amazon. It's published all over the world. You can get it on Google Books, but Rabbi Zeb Parat was kind enough to include a recommendation. Dr. R.T. Kendall, a minister at Westminster Chapel, who was there in London from 1977 to 2002, a man of great distinction. Dr. David Chadwick, founding pastor of Moments of Hope in Charlotte. Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, president of Israel Today Ministries. I just finished writing the foreword to his new book. It is a winner. It is something that I strongly encourage you to keep your eye on him on Israel Today Ministries. Sign up for his newsletter so you can get the announcement of when the book is published. Dr. Hakeem Collins, best-selling author of Unseen Warfare. Kim Frolander, Robert Hodgkin, Dr. Ramona Pravasco, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Kim Moss, Joan Hunter, Kathy DeGraw, Derek Gilbert from Skywatch TV, Dr. Mark Sherwood, running for governor of the state of Oklahoma, Rabbi Kurt Schneider, Discovering the Jewish Jesus, Jermaine Copeland, author of the best-selling books Prayers That Avail Much, Rhonda Stoppe, The No Regrets Woman, Steve Fair, Journey into the Divided Heart, Don Otis, president of Veritas. And you're going to find these endorsements are there in the book because they believe in the message, and I believe in sharing a very thorough message with you, not a light-hearted or simple message that talks down to you, but drives you back to the scriptures. It's my goal to bring the scriptures to life, to show you the connection between the old and the new, and to make it relevant for today. What's happening today in Israel has been written about in the Bible. And unless you and I come together and make these connections, we can't see how prophetic these events are and prepare ourselves for what is to come and to be able to recognize what is to come. So, as we turn back to this Psalm 83 coalition, it talks about and refers to the tents of Edom. Those are the descendants of Esau. Those are Palestinian refugees and southern Jordanians. It mentions the Ishmaelites from Saudi Arabia, the Moabites, Palestinian refugees and central Jordanians, the Hagrites, those are Egyptians, Gebal, those are the northern Lebanese, Ammon, Palestinian refugees and northern Jordanians, Amalek, those are Arabs south of Israel, Philistia, Palestinian refugees and Hamas of Gaza Strip, the inhabitants of Tyre, Hezbollah, and southern Lebanese, Assyria, Syrians, and perhaps northern Iraqis included, and the children of Lot, which is Moab and Ammon. Palestinians is the ethnic label tossed around loosely in modern times to identify three predominantly Arab groups of people: the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians of the West Bank, and the Palestinian refugees. These groups inhabit the territories that most closely approach the borders of modern day Israel. We generally understand that these groups are comprised of a mixture of peoples who descend from various origins, the main one of these being traceable back to Esau, father of the Edomites. Now, keep in mind that list of those Confederates that are named by Asaph in the Psalm 83 coalition. Now let's take a look at Ezekiel 38 and 39 at the Gog-Magog coalition. So Magog is made up of what we consider to be Russia and the former Soviet republics, all that came under the Russian Empire, Persia, which is modern day Iran, Kush, which is the Sudan, Ethiopia, and probably Eritrea, Put, which is Libya, Algeria, and Tunisia, Gomer, Meshach, and Tubal, which is Turkey and possibly Germany and Austria, Beth Togarmah, Turkey, Armenia, and the Turkish-speaking people of Asia Minor and Central Asia. Notice none of them were named in the Psalm 83 war. Why would that be? Are those that named in the Psalm 83 war, are they not the exact neighbors of Israel? Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, these are the borders of the neighboring countries of Israel who are plotting its attack. But they are not around to join this Ezekiel 38 and 39 coalition. It would be illogical for us to think that if they did exist, they would not want to become a part of this attack on this mortal enemy, this biblically mortal enemy. But they are not mentioned as a part of this coalition. The assumption must be that they are not in existence in their current form. The belief is in the Psalm 83 war that Israel will expand their tent pegs, which the Bible tells us that Israel will expand their tent pegs. And when we take a look at those countries today, whose names are modern names and their borders are modern borders, then you find out that maybe they don't exist at the time of the Ezekiel 38-39 confrontation, and that Israel meets those four prerequisites of living at peace with their neighbors, having no walls and barbed wire fences, that they have wealth, and that they are a sovereign nation under one government. This impending war in the Middle East will be a major and devastating war. The Arab Confederacy of Psalm 83 will be defeated and destroyed by the army of Israel. Jeremiah 49 and 2 says, "But the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will sound the battle cry against Rabbah of the Ammonites," that's Amman, Jordan. "It will become a mound of ruins, and its surrounding villages will be set on fire. Then Israel will drive out those who drove her out, says the Lord." This has not happened yet because Jordan and Amman still exist. So this is a future event. The days are coming, still future for us. Jeremiah 49 and 8. "Turn and flee. Hide in deep caves, you who live in Dedan," which is Saudi Arabia, "for I will bring disaster on Esau at the time I punish him." This is southern Jordan and Saudi Arabia. That hasn't happened yet. Southern Jordan still exists. Petra is still in southern Jordan. Moab, the Moabites, the descendants of Lot, still live there. Excuse me, still live there. So that's a future prophecy. Jeremiah 49:19, "Like a lion, confederacy of Esau coming out from Jordan's thickets to a rich pasture land, Israel. I will chase Edom from its land in an instant. Who is the chosen one I will appoint for this? Who is like me and who can challenge me, and what shepherd can stand against me?" These are just three of many scriptures that point to a Middle East war that's fast approaching. Interesting enough, many Bible scholars apparently do not recognize how soon. Some scholars place this war within the 7-year tribulation period. However, that is not the case. Obadiah 1:15 and 16 says, "The day of the Lord, the tribulation, is near for all nations," meaning not yet happened. "As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. Just as you, Esau, drank, you experienced judgment on my holy hill, Israel, so all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and be as if they had never been." Obadiah 1:15 and 16 is a key scripture which reveals that Esau's judgment will happen before the tribulation or the day of the Lord. Some have lumped this battle in with the campaign of Armageddon, but as we have already seen, this must take place before Armageddon and before the tribulation. There are two judgments that come against the territory of Edom in the latter years. The first by the Jews against the Palestinians and their Confederate neighbors, and the second is by Messiah Jesus against all the armies assembled in the campaign of Armageddon. If we compare Jeremiah 49:19 and 20 to 22 to the counterpart passage found in Jeremiah 50:43 to 46, we see depicted in both cases a military effort staged at the floodplain of Jordan against the Jews. The first campaign is by the Psalm 83 Confederacy led by Edom, and the second is the campaign of Armageddon led by the Antichrist. In the first campaign, the objective is to destroy the Jews. In the second, Armageddon, all the armies of the world will converge, with many gathering to fight against the Antichrist. It is at that point that Messiah will return, and they will all turn to fight him, but will be completely destroyed. The Psalm 83 war will occur soon in advance of both the Russian-Iranian invasion attempt and the 70th week of Daniel, the 7-year tribulation period. During the tribulation period, the much-feared Israeli army will be sidelined for the first 3.5 years, while a false and temporary peace accord is in place. Then in the second 3.5 years, this army is defeated, and the Jews flee to Israel for safety elsewhere as the Antichrist advances in an attempt to destroy them. Remember, at this time, the Antichrist has set up his headquarters in uh, in Babylon, and at this time he leaves Babylon before Babylon is destroyed and sets up a new headquarters in Jerusalem. God knows this is going to take place, and he tells and warns the Jews to leave and flee Jerusalem. This is why the passage which refers to Jesus coming to redeem the tents of Jerusalem first does not imply that he is coming to Jerusalem because the Jews are not there. They are living in temporary quarters somewhere outside of Jerusalem, and I believe that that place will be Petra and can back that up. Obadiah 1:18 says the house of Jacob will be a fire and the house of Joseph a flame. The house of Esau will be stubble and they will set it on fire and consume it. There will be no survivors from the house of Esau, the Lord has spoken. Israel, represented by the house of Jacob, and Joseph reduces southern Jordan, represented by Esau, to rubble. This defeat is thorough, leaving no survivors. Obadiah 1 and 9 says, your warriors, O Teman, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down in the slaughter. Now, Obadiah 1 and 9 describes the soldiers of Teman as having been slaughtered. This emphasizes the severity of Israel's victory over the Palestinian descendants of Edom. Teman's modern day equivalent may be uh, about 3 miles east of Petra. However, Teman and the mountains of Edom, of Esau, appear to be representative of the entire region of Edom in this passage. The war extends into Saudi Arabia, and the passages continue there. So the army of Israel will cut off its Confederate adversaries and then come down upon the Gaza territory. And continuing their conquest, they plunder the people of the east, which, according to its scriptural usage in Genesis 29 and 1, would be Syria. Then they lay their hands on all of Jordan, causing the capital to fall under Jewish sovereignty. Ammon represents northern Jordan, the location of the capital city of Ammon. Isaiah says the people of Ammon shall obey them, depicting the surrender of Jordanian sovereignty. As this war rages, Isaiah 17 describes what will happen in the north with Syria. The description here is quite amazing. Take a few seconds to open up and read Isaiah 17, 1 to 14. Isaiah 17, 1 to 9 is describing one of two events. Syria, who we know has chemical and biological weapons, launches some kind of chemical or biological attack that kills many in northern Israel, which is then followed by a nuclear attack from Israel that wipes out Damascus. This is that fulfillment where Damascus is finally a ruinous heap. Now, Damascus, of course, is in shambles, but it's still the headquarters and the capital of Syria. It's still where Assad is ruling from. Until it is utterly destroyed, it is a ruinous heap. The prophecy by Isaiah against Damascus has not been fulfilled. Uh, or Israel fighting on all fronts and facing a Syrian army sweeping through the north utilized a limited version of its Samson option to avoid being overrun. This nuclear strike is clearly going to hit Damascus, which is just over the Israeli northern border. It could be the Isaiah 17:4 to 6 is describing the radiation poisoning experienced in the north due to the fallout. So when you stand on Mount Bental and you look out across into Syria, you're right there at the Syria-Israeli border. You can see the outskirts of the suburbs of Damascus. You can hear mortar fire. You can hear machine gun fire in the valley. And because of the way the wind blows, it blows the sound towards you. So you're about 60 kilometers or so away from Damascus, and things are going on still today. The results from either event are clearly spelled out. Damascus, the oldest continually inhabited city on earth, will be instantly and completely destroyed, and Syria will be crushed by the IDF. So Isaiah 17:1, 9, and 14 explain this. Isaiah 17:1, an oracle concerning Damascus. See, Damascus will no longer be a city, but will become a heap of ruins. Isaiah 17 and 9. In that day their strong cities, which they left because of the Israelites, will be like places abandoned in thickets and undergrowth, and all will be desolation. And Isaiah 17:14, in the evening, sudden terror. Before the morning, they are gone. This is the portion of those who loot us, the lot of those who plunder us. So, very important that we study this, that there are prophecies against Damascus. And we see throughout the scriptures the expansion of what's going to happen as Israel is involved in this war, which is going to expand their tent pegs. Now, as we begin to look at what's going to happen in the end, the judgment to befall Edom will serve as a precursor of the judgment that will come in the days of the Lord upon all the nations. Zechariah 2 makes clear that this judgment against Edom, which also extends to other Confederate member nations, is to serve as an example to the other nations, but more importantly, it is a call to the meek of the earth to get right before the day of the Lord. So he declares that these events. Now we know that the campaign of Armageddon is something that's going to take place. The Antichrist, the rise of the Antichrist, and the war. And we know that because of God's warning that the return of Messiah is not going to be to Jerusalem. The Bible seems to indicate Jerusalem's captured, recaptured, and captured again, but no one unit is able to hold it. Uh, and we look at the generation, the battle for Jerusalem, that the national redemption, it's through this battle that the national redemption of Israel is accomplished. Now, because of this invading army and because of this war, we know that God is going to warn the Jews, and although we will pay a high price, 2/3 of the Jewish population will die. We need to be prepared for that. And we need to be prepared for what's going to come. So we know that in the campaign of Armageddon, the battle of that great day of the Lord Almighty, the Lord first goes to Edom to rescue Israel from the hand of the Antichrist. Here he soils his clothing in the blood of his enemies, Isaiah 63, verses 1 to 6. Then the Lord goes to the valley of Megiddo, where he defeats many of the armies of the world. That's Revelation 16, verses 12 to 16. Next, the Lord defeats most of the remainder of the world's evil forces in the valley of Jehoshaphat. That's Joel 3, verses 1 to 2, Joel 3, 9 to 17, and then Revelation 14, verses 14 to 20. Last, the Lord will come to Jerusalem to defeat the advanced guard of the Antichrist, who will attempt to wipe out the city. Zechariah 12, verse 1 through 9, and Revelation 16, verse 17 to 21. On the great day of his return, Messiah will defeat all of his enemies, capture alive the Antichrist and the false prophet, and cast them into the lake of fire, where they will be tormented day and night forever. So the progression of this event, of these events, is that although the common perception is that the soldiers of the armies assembled at Armageddon are somehow inhuman, nuclear war has robbed them of everything. The most dramatic moment in world history, after winning 4 successful battles, Messiah will set his feet on the Mount of Olives. He goes to redeem the tents of Jerusalem, and I believe, and the scriptures support, that that place could very well be Petra, because it is under Jewish rule and authority. And then he makes this journey. And he says, in the battle, as the battles rage in Jerusalem and the valley of Jehoshaphat, what is left of the division of the northern army, defeated on the mountains of Israel, withdraw to regroup. They head down the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea. But God says in Joel 2, but I will remove the northern army far from you, and I will drive it into a parched and desolate land, and its vanguard into the eastern sea. The Jordan Valley runs some 200 miles from the North Sea of Galilee to Eilat. Into this valley streams the remaining hordes from the east to meet in battle with what remains of both Russian Muslim alliance and the armies of the Antichrist. This is the valley of decision spoken by the prophet Joel. They launch their attack. The leadership of Israel is surrounded. They're cut off, and the armies of the Antichrist are gathered, and we picture the words of Isaiah 53 proceeding from the lips of those who are surrounded by the armies, knowing that defeat is imminent, that their destruction is confronting them. And we hear them cry out, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And this gives us an explanation for the vision of Isaiah and an understanding of, I saw one whose garments were stained with blood, and I asked him what was the meaning of this. And he said, I had to fight them myself. There was no one there to help me. None of the armies of the Lord were there to help him. Messiah, Jesus, defeats them himself. And then he redeems the remnant, redeems the leadership of Israel, because they cry for his return. And then he makes that victory ascent 200 miles north, where he ultimately plants his feet on the mountain. And the mountain is split in two. The day of the Lord is coming. So we see these events. We need to understand what's going on in prophecy, and we need to understand what's going on in the world today. And it's happening right now. And we're trying to make sense of the current situation in Israel and its prophetic implication. And that brings us to an end of our second hour of Revealing the Truth. I encourage you to support DonBertTeam.com and DeVarChiropractic.com, as well as become a contributor. Be an acquirer of the teachings from the Biblical Truth Library. And I leave you with these words from Numbers chapter 6 and verse 22, where the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the children of Israel. He goes on to say, in this way I will put my name on them and I will bless them. Please bow your heads to receive the Aaronic benediction. Yivarechek Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav v'kunecha, Yisar Adonai panav v'yasim shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance toward you and give you his peace. In the name of the Prince of Peace, Jesus our Messiah. Amen and amen. And we'll close with these final announcements.